Hello, 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 and welcome to Kindred Skulls, a very special episode of Kindred Skulls, all the way back in April. The process of the new season begins, and free agents are added to your team. You have the draft, you have all the exciting, your roster balloons, and there's all these new faces, and it all builds to today when we have our roster cuts and the final 53 are announced. And that's what we're talking about in today's episode. I'd like to introduce my lovely and talented Matt Freese, my co-host. How are you this evening?
I'm doing well, Greg. I'm doing well. We got DJ Greg in the house today with the shades, rocking them, looking
DJ
good.
Gregg's in the house.
But
What's
uh,
up?
but yeah, it's kind of a bittersweet day, right? Because while it's kind of exciting that we get to see the final version, this isn't the final version of the Vikings roster. Let's be honest, they're going to continue to make moves throughout the season. But a lot of dreams ultimately came to an end today for a lot of the guys that end up getting cut. So it is kind of a somber day in that regard. And a part of the issue is, and maybe I'll end up criticizing some of the players here today or that sort of thing. But I just want to say, like, these guys are better at their jobs. They're better at being football players than I think I will ever be at my profession, right? Like, just in terms of the level they've achieved just to be fringe NFL roster players is really an accomplishment that shouldn't be, set aside. So just want to get out in front of that and say that yeah, maybe these guys weren't quite good enough to make the Vikings roster, right? But it's a really really competitive thing to be able to even get that close.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And you lose sight of that in this process, huh? Like, you get so focused on the team and all this other stuff, and you do lose sight of how even the worst players, even the ones that we love bagging on or whatever. I have my personal foils on the team, and everybody does, and um, you lose sight of the fact that they're still really good, even though they're just to make it to that level. That's a really good point, Matt. Really good point. It's a bummer, but it happened, and we have a lot to go through here. Should we just dive right in, man? How you feel?
Yeah. Why don't we hit the big ticket items first, right?
Okay. Yep. Let's talk about. Put on my DJ Greg glasses. Matt Freese, I want you to tell me about the top three surprises in this year's cut day action. We're talking cuts, trades, whatever you feel. What's your instinct? The top three surprises today.
Well, I think the top three surprises are somewhat related, and they're all pretty straightforward, right? Like I think most of the names we saw get off the roster. Now there were some close battles at the bottom, but most of the names that ended up getting cut were people who we knew were on the fringe or expected to be on the fringe. I think the two guys that we got rid of that we did not expect, that I personally did not expect to be off the roster at the beginning of the day, were Armand Watts. Obviously, he was the big surprise cut, right? The
Mm-hmm.
Vikings, we'd kind of penciled him in as the starter, as that third interior defensive lineman in base looks, right? Like, I don't think, the Vikings are going to run a ton of five down fronts. At least they're not going to run them to the level that they did in the preseason. But when they were going to run those, we figured it was going to be Harrison Phillips, Dalvin Tomlinson, and Armand Watts out there as those three guys. But we end up cutting Armand Watts. Now that saves the Vikings about $2 million in cap space, and the subsequent trade that they made for Ross Blacklock, the defensive tackle from the Texans, he's another interior defensive lineman, I think informs why Armand Watts was cut, right? Everybody was kind of shocked that Armand Watts was cut when the news first broke, and then the trade for Ross Blacklock happens. Okay, the cut kind of makes sense. Um, the other
Do
major piece of news,
Matt, do you prefer the direction we went there, or would you have rather stuck with Armand Watts?
um, it's a difficult question. I can't say I know too much about what Ross Blacklock has done since he's been in the NFL. I know the PFF grades are not good on Ross Blacklock.
The
I mean,
charts don't like him.
so that's a bad sign, right? Like, generally he's not winning blocks, particularly in run defense. He was pretty much abysmal in terms of PFF grades. Now, I haven't watched him personally, right? So I can't speak to that. I did like him as a prospect out of TCU. He's an explosive player, right? He may be a bit more linear of an athlete, but he was an explosive pass rusher coming out of TCU. Now, we haven't seen those guys out of TCU succeed very much, right? LJ Collier, the first round pick for the Seahawks. Obviously, Ross Blackhawk was the second round pick, and now he's on his second team after 3 years. So, and we didn't give up much for him either. We swapped a 6 for a 7. So it's not like he was exactly blowing the Texans away, right? This is more from the Texans' perspective. I think this is more of we were thinking about cutting this guy anyway, so this is what we're going to get for him, right? With that being said, I think, there's still a reason he was a second round pick in terms of those explosive traits and those tendencies. So I think you might be able to get a little bit more pass rush juice than you were able to get from Armon Watts. I thought Armon Watts was a decent pass rusher, but he's not, an NFL starter caliber, like 3 technique, in my opinion, quite. So, this was I would say Armon Watts was the weakest starter of the 11 starters that you could pencil in on the defense. Maybe Chandon Sullivan has an argument for that. Maybe Cameron Bynum has an argument for that. But I'm pretty optimistic on Cameron Bynum's chances. Actually, that would just be more based on his limited playing time. So, changing that position there doesn't concern me too much, because I also like what we saw out of Jonathan Bullard in the preseason. I think Jonathan Bullard on base downs can provide a solid presence based on his preseason performance, based on what he did for the Chicago Bears when Ed Donatel was there and Vic Fangio was the defensive coordinator at that time. So I think, if anything, it says a bit more about what the team feels about Jonathan Bullard. And I also kind of think the Armon Watts cut was kind of a way to just keep Eseze Otomewo on the roster. But sure. if I flip over to the other move the Vikings made, which is trading Jesse Davis for...
Yeah, so speaking of trading players we were likely to cut for something anyway.
Yeah.
Jesse Davis.
Yeah, so Jesse Davis, I'm not sure, I didn't expect the Vikings to cut Jesse Davis because they thought that he would, I mean, the money told us that they thought he was the best player of the interior offensive linemen that we signed this offseason, right? And we ended up keeping both Chris Reed and Austin Schlottman while trading Jesse Davis. So the money, I think, is also the reason we traded Jesse Davis, though, right? Because it saves us money against the cap. Now, we still did incur $1.5 million total in dead money from the signing bonuses, but we still save his base salary, which I think was also like $1.5 million or something like that. We save having to pay that. So that's the reason he ended up getting traded. We got absolute peanuts for him, right? It was a conditional 2025 7th round pick, which 2025 is the furthest you can go out in terms of picks, so it's literally the last pick we could have received, and it's conditional. I don't know what the condition is. I assume it's similar to the condition we got in the Nick Mullins trade, which is, he has to be active for 2 games or something like that. So it's probably Davis has to be active in a couple games, and then we get the pick.
What's so good about that, Matt, the way you phrased that about it being so far in the future, it assumes so much, right? We're going to all be here in 3 years, and we're definitely going to find a guy we want in the bottom of the 7th round in 3 years. It is literally trading for nothing.
Yeah, it's the nihilism corner right here, right now. Will we even, the existentialism corner, will we even exist in 2 years? 3 years, I suppose.
The most existential trade of the offseason. I love it. All right, cool. So let's keep it moving here. Let's just go through these really quickly. Some less notable moves, but still notable, worth discussing. Big surprise cut here. I was surprised just because he was lighting it up in the preseason. T.Y. McGill, love the celebration. T.Y. I never get to see him again. It's a bummer. He's off the team. What happened there, Matt?
So he wasn't cut. We placed him on IR. And an important note, both BC Johnson and T.Y. McGill got placed on IR. Obviously, BC Johnson tore his ACL. That's very disappointing. He is out for the season. But the type of IR they got placed on, they are not eligible for the IR designated to return. So, in recent years, the NFL under COVID protocols has shortened the length of time for IR designated return. It used to be 8 games. Now it's 4 games, I believe, that the players have to be out before they can be designated to return. T.Y. McGill is not eligible for that. He also, my understanding is his injury is a high ankle sprain, which is in a 4 to 6 week variety, which is a 4 to 6 week variety type of injury. Now, it was kind of hard based on the roster shuffling that the Vikings did to keep him on. I mean, we'll talk about the roster later. I think there probably were a couple players, particularly an offensive lineman or two, you could have cut to keep him, and then you put him on that short-term IR. But I guess with his, with his history, right? He's been on like 7 NFL teams. He's 30. He has this injury. It's going to be hard for him to stick on the roster, even with the stellar preseason performance. So what may end up happening here is T.Y. McGill gets a second opinion on the injury. He comes to an injury settlement with the Vikings. And what the injury settlement does is after a certain number of games, that player is released from the Vikings, essentially. Like, the player gets paid a certain amount based on the number of games they theoretically would have missed, and then after that number of games, they're eligible to be signed by other teams. So it does probably spell the end of T.Y. McGill as a Viking, which is unfortunate. I think based off of his preseason performance, and that it's an amazing sack dance, right? Like,
yeah,
it's just absolutely incredible. I would have loved to see that in a regular season game, and I think that the team still doesn't have that interior pass rush. I kind of talked about this with Nick last week, but T.Y. McGill gave us the potential to provide that interior pass rush, right? I guess we're banking on Ross Blacklock coming in and being able to provide that now.
Well,
but
we might be blanking.
we might be blanking on it as well, which is a bit of a concern for me going into the season.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's set that aside for now. This is a day of hope and excitement. we're focused on the positives. Obviously, losing BC really sucks. I hope he comes back strong next season. He had a good preseason.
Yeah, I did kind of blow that by that for McGill, but it's just the worst for BC Johnson. I feel so bad for him tearing his ACL 1 year, working so hard to come back from that. He got praise from Kevin O'Connell. He would have made the team had this not happened, and then he tears his other ACL. So in a preseason game again, it's really unfortunate having to work so hard to come back, and now this frustration. It sucks.
It's another one of those things you kind of lose sight of, like how those preseason games, it's so fun to bag on them. It's like, oh, these are so boring. If this was what football was, I wouldn't watch, and it's all true, but it's also like life or death for a lot of players, just like BC, and it just sucks that sucks that we're not going to be able to see it yet.
Yeah.
Hopefully he comes back strong next year. All right. Here's the moments. We got to talk about it. Let's talk about these guys. They're no longer a part of the team. That's probably better for all of us. We can stop having arguments about these things. The 2 giant turds of the preseason, Kellen Mond and Sean Mannion, are no longer part of the team.
Yeah, the Vikings... 100% of the Vikings snaps at quarterback this preseason were cut today. Both Kellen Mond and Sean Mannion. I was really concerned.
Essentially a complete waste of all of our time.
I was really concerned for you, honestly, earlier today, Greg, when it seemed like right after we cut Mond, there was a pretty decent chance that Mannion was going to stick on the roster. And that would have made for a much different podcast episode, listeners. You would have had a lot more fire for Greg.
You were hoping that would happen. You'd be like,
I kind of was. It would have been great for ratings, but no. Mannion. I don't know if we need to discuss a whole ton about Mannion. It does sound like we're going to try to bring him back to the practice squad. Kirk Cousins loves having him in the QB room. That's the reason Mannion's there. Kirk really likes, I guess, bouncing ideas off of him in meetings. And
quarterback running our team, dude.
And Sean Mannion likes getting paid more money than he would as a coach, I suppose. So I would too, personally. So that's the reason Sean Mannion is there. But Kellen Mond, it is disappointing to see him gone after just one season on the Vikings. An early third round pick, you hope and expect for a lot more than that. Obviously, Davis Mills, who went one pick after, is the starting quarterback for the Texans, right? So you kind of have that immediate comparison of, and let's not just blame the Vikings for this, right? Kyle Trask got drafted by the Bucks one pick ahead of Mond. So, the NFL is not necessarily great at this in general, but it's just disappointing to see that. I
Very
think
disappointing.
I think that it's fair that the Vikings cut Mond. Like, unfortunately, the problem was, and Nick and I talked about this, just the way he was going through progressions was too slow for an NFL offense. You saw flashes of nice throws, and then you'd immediately see mistakes that are like simple mistakes that NFL level quarterbacks simply can't make. And I think that's what kicked him off the roster. His lack of ability to go through progressions quickly, some of his decision making, particularly in regards with taking sacks in this past game, like it was pretty rough. He's holding on to the ball for way too long, and he's just not making NFL level decisions quickly enough. And I think that's where we see that. Now, you
The
know,
good news. Sorry.
go maybe that's something he's able to improve upon. Like I think he did a little bit better from preseason week 1 to preseason week 2 and 3 here for us, but like it just wasn't at a pace fast enough to justify, I think, letting him have a roster spot. So maybe he's able to work independent of being on the Vikings. Maybe he catches on to a practice squad elsewhere, or maybe the Vikings bring him back to the practice squad. We don't know what our practice squad looks like yet. It doesn't sound like that's likely, however, and
Well,
he's able to
I,
improve, but he's just not it right now, unfortunately.
I can tell you this: if we bring Sean Mannion back onto the practice squad, that QB room will be the most perfect Minnesota Vikings QB room that has ever existed. Okay? It's all boring retread guys from other teams who just sitting around talking ball, baby, because that's how championships are won. Oh my God. Yeah,
I
it's super disappointing day for me personally. I was still a believer. I think he's got potential. I would like young players to be given a lot more leash than that. Our team is constructed the way it's constructed, and the moves they made, I think, do make sense in the strictest sense.
Nick and I talked about the Mullins trade last week, but I think Nick Mullins makes sense as a much more competent NFL quarterback who you can put in a game
Yeah.
right now compared to either Mond or Mannion. Like, I said this last week, if Kirk Cousins goes down for 4 games with Mond and Mannion, we're probably going 0-4, right? Like, we're just totally screwed with either of those guys based on how they played this preseason. If Nick Mullins is in there, we have a chance. Now, if Kirk Cousins goes down for the entire season, we're totally screwed. Like, Nick Mullins isn't going to save us from that regard,
That
but
won't happen though. He hasn't missed the
yeah,
game in 4
but
years. You
there
guys
but
know.
there are very few players who you can say, oh, my starting quarterback goes down, I'm not totally screwed. So that's why I feel, a lot more comfortable with Mullins as the backup quarterback.
Yeah, I feel that. Let's never discuss them ever again. All right, let's move on to let's let's just go through these quickly, okay? And then we'll go through the whole roster and talk
Yeah.
about standout players and everything. Just real quickly, Troy Dye, a surprising addition to the roster. I thought he was kind of struggling in preseason. I thought that was kind of the sense.
Yeah, so
Um,
so I guess the idea here is the Vikings like Troy Dye better than both Chaz Surratt and Blake Lynch, who were kind of the other two who were competing significantly for the roster. Now, Chaz Surratt, ultimately another waste of a draft pick, right? Like, it's very disappointing how
the
little
third
the
rounder.
Vikings got out of that third round, where we cut Surratt, Wyatt Davis, and Kellen Mond today. Surratt just didn't have it at the NFL level. He never showed the ability
Brady was just like taking a shotgun to last
to
year's
to
last year's
do it
guys. He's
at the
like,
NFL level.
not my choice,
Like,
not my choice.
like it's so it's really disappointing. But I don't think he was a roster candidate. I think Blake Lynch is a better player than Troy Dye. The team seems to like Troy Dye better, so that's kind of why I put it on there. Just because I think it's a little bit interesting that Dye made it. Dye also suffered an ankle injury in that third preseason game, or some sort of injury in that third preseason game. So we'll have to see what his status is. Maybe he's going to be an IR stash and they want to bring Blake Lynch back or something like that.
Sure, yeah. Or Blake is on the short list or whatever.
Yep.
And then really quickly, we did lose a player that you were pretty much digging in that last preseason game.
Uh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, Miles Dorn had a really nice last preseason game. He ended up getting cut. Now, when we talked about this last week, Nick and I kind of went over the roster. We had Miles Dorn off. Like, he wasn't somebody I was expecting to make the roster, but he made a decent push in the final game, and I just wanted to shout him out for that. Like, he was over the field making plays, making tackles, and that sort of thing.
Well, maybe he'll end up on the practice squad.
Yep.
Um, we will find that out mostly tomorrow, or starting tomorrow at least. All right. So let's talk about the guys that we've talked about. The guys that aren't here for different reasons. Let's talk about the guys that are here. All right. I was thinking, or we were thinking, we'll go position by position and just kind of say a little something about the group. And then there's also some players, Matt, I know you want to kind of tamp down on.
Yeah, so what we'll do in this section is we will finally get to you our rookie scouting reports for the final rookies. Nick and I promised this a long time ago. We kind of failed to deliver just by being busy and not getting around to recording that episode during the preseason due to the other things that were happening. But I will give you our scouting reports. Unfortunately, Nick can't be here today, so
we're combining bits here. We're mixing them together.
Yeah, absolutely. This will suffice for tape talk for the week.
Yeah, exactly. This is tape talk. All right. Yeah. So let's go position by position. Don't need to spend a lot of time here at quarterback. We knew Kirk Cousins was the guy a long time ago. We've talked about Mullins already. Anything you wanted to add about the QB position?
Yeah, I kind of like that we're only going with 2 quarterbacks just to open up space on the rest of the roster, and I don't think we needed to go for 3 personally. So I'm fine with the 2 that we have.
Sure thing. The running back group, a very strong group. There was rumors. There may still be the possibility that Madison's going to move on. But right now, as it stands, I look at that running back room: Dalvin Cook, Alex Madison, Kenny Nwangwu, Ty Chandler, and I'm looking at guys that I feel like could at least start 1 or 2 games. How do you think? How do you feel, Matt?
I love the running back depth. I feel really good about it. I don't know how I feel about Nwangwu as a full-time player at running back, but obviously he's critical as our starting kick returner, right? He returned 2 kicks for touchdowns last year. I think he is a critical part of the roster. And then Ty Chandler, we really like what we've seen from Ty Chandler in preseason. I mean, he's looked really explosive. I think he had something like 19 carries for 100 some yards. If you look at preseason games 1 and 3, he averaged 9 yards per carry across those 2 games. His overall average for the preseason was 7 yards per carry. Like, he's looked really, really explosive.
Well, and to that end, why don't you tell us a bit about Ty Chandler? Let's get into the scouting report here.
So my scouting report on Ty Chandler, and I watched Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, and Miami from him. I'll tie in a little bit of what we saw in the preseason from him. My first note is that he's an explosive athlete. He has a ton of burst. He hits the hole fast, and he's got good long speed. Like, that's obvious from his game. The second one is that he's got nice feet and lateral movement ability to avoid trash in the backfield. There were multiple times where he had trash in the backfield, unblocked defenders, that sort of thing, defenders that were on his ground at his feet, and he was able to get around them. So that's another important part of being a running back, being able to get around that. I would say he showed solid pad level. Like, he's not a massive player. I forget what his exact dimensions are, but he's not, a thumping running back or a power back like an Alex Madison, but he showed good technique and pad level. He's not going to get massive drive when he contacts defenders and fall forward for a ton of yards, but he will fall forward at least. He's not going to lose ground when he makes contact with the defenders, and I thought he had good contact balance as well. Now, I would say most NFL running backs have good contact balance, right? Like, Dalvin Cook is an example of somebody with elite contact balance. I don't think Ty Chandler is there, but I think he has solid NFL level contact balance. Like, he's able to work through defenders who are tackling his legs. There was actually one really, really nice run that sealed the game against Wake Forest that showed maybe a little bit higher level contact balance. But in general, like, he doesn't escape tackles at a high level, I would say. I'd say it's more of a solid NFL level. Um,
Can I
one,
ask
one
you a question?
Go ahead.
Do you feel like what you've seen so far scouting him is translating to the NFL level? And I
Oh
might
yeah,
repeat that.
I think what we've seen so far does translate to the NFL level. And I'll get to a couple more things. One of my notes is I think he does a really good job on gap runs, following lead blockers, showing nuance and pacing in that. And I think he's not as consistent on zone runs. There were a bunch of times where he bounced the ball outside. That's a sign of an athlete playing an athlete and not reading zone runs out well. And there were other times where he didn't showcase good pacing in the zone game where he was able to set up blocks. And I think while he's good at moving laterally to avoid things in the backfield, there was also some wasted movement there where he'd make extra cuts that he didn't have to and run kind of a zigzag route rather than getting downhill. And while like in the NFL level, I think he's done a good job reading gap plays. I think he's done a good job finding holes. I think he's shown good burst getting into those holes, and that's what's led to his very impressive yards per carry. I do think there are a couple runs where he does still showcase that wasted movement, where he's making multiple cuts to get through kind of a linear path. So I think that does need to be cleaned up if he wants to be a consistent NFL back. But I think
Matt, when you have sweet feet, don't you want to use them?
yes, but in moderation, right? I
I
mean,
know.
you know how it
Yeah,
is.
I
Uh,
know how it is.
but yeah, so I think all of that's shown up. The other aspect to his game, which we haven't seen as much of in the preseason, is his receiving prowess. So I have a couple notes on his blocking and his receiving as well. So I think he's a competitive blocker. He shows the willingness to block and that sort of thing. I don't think he's technically there yet in terms of punch timing, his ability to frame defenders well, and that sort of thing. I do think he reads out blocks pretty well. Like, he understands his blocking assignments. There was a really nice rep where he had to come across the formation to block a blitzing player, and he executed that one really well. There was a really bad rep technique wise where he like hunched himself over, kind of jumped at a player, and got completely run by a linebacker. So it's kind of a give or take. I mentioned his size. He's not going to be able to take on defensive tackles or defensive ends in the blocking game for a significant amount of time. That's not something you want to ask him to do one on one. And then if I go to his pass game, I think he showed a consistent ability as a vertical threat in the passing game. Like, there are a number of routes where he's able to get downfield vertical, whether it's wheel routes or I think there was a seam route he was asked to run even, and made vertical plays in the passing game, which is really exciting. He made explosive plays with long speed on screens and that sort of thing. So he showcased, some really nice stuff in the passing game. I don't think he was a nuanced route runner necessarily. A lot of the stuff was just, a wheel route where basically you're running as fast as you can vertically, or, stuff out in the flat and screens and that sort of thing. So it's not quite like, don't expect an Alvin Kamara right away, right? Who's running, or Christian McCaffrey, who's running ridiculous routes, from the running back position or as a running back and getting open on choice routes.
You
Constantly.
just created a sound bite, Matt. That's the only thing anyone's going to take away. Matt
But
Freese says Ty Chandler, not Christian McCaffrey.
yeah, I mean, he needs to show a lot more to be able to be at that level. But I think that he can be really exciting. And he also shows good hands and ball tracking. Like, my comp for him as a player would be a Duke Johnson type. So, and maybe that's not the most exciting thing, but I thought Duke Johnson was a really good player coming out of Miami, and I thought
Still in the league, man.
and he's still bounced around the league. He's been a pass down player for a long time. I thought he had more as a runner than he's been allowed to showcase in the NFL. Like, no team has thought of him that way, but I thought he had the potential to do it if he was given the opportunity. So we'll hopefully
Miami,
see
right?
that from Chandler, and hopefully see good stuff. I mean, we have Dalvin Cook as our starting running back, right? So we're not expecting a ton from him immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff, Matt. Should we move
Yeah,
to
why,
the
why
next
don't we
position?
jump forward to the fullbacks?
Yeah, just briefly, we there were some rumors out there we might lose CJ Ham, but that did not happen. He stayed with the squad. Feels really good to have him on the team
Yeah,
again.
CJ Ham rules. I'm glad he's around.
He rocks. I thought it was kind of dumb that we were even considering
Well,
dumping him.
so I don't think this team was considering moving on from him, but people kind of were trying to read the tea leaves when we cut Jake Vargas, and that's just because the team didn't think Jake Vargas was important enough to keep around. Like they thought
Yeah,
CJ Ham was important enough to have a role, but not Jake Vargas, essentially.
CJ Ham has always proved his value, so I'm glad he's still here. Um, okay, let's talk about the wide receiver group. We've already know the big three. You know, JJ2K, Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne. Not a huge surprise to see Amir Smith Marset on this list. And then the final piece. Very excited. Our rookie pick made it through. Jalen Naylor. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Jalen? We've seen him play. We've seen him catch balls from a variety of quarterbacks who are no longer with us. So probably a little difficult to judge him, in that sense. But Matt, tell us what you saw scouting him and how you feel about it, how
Yeah.
it's translated so
So
far.
so real quick on the wide receivers, just BC Johnson, obviously, like we talked about, devastated with head injury. It did open up a spot clearly for Jalen Naylor, and we didn't feel confident in any of the other guys who we cut. And there were some interesting names there. Obviously, Dan Chisena, special teams ace, Tristan Jackson, who I was thinking after BC got hurt might make the roster, but he ended up not doing it. Myron Mitchell showed a couple nice things. But, it helped us, I
He
think, with the
dropped the
other
ball.
parts of the roster to only keep 5 wide receivers when it looked like we were trending towards keeping 6 had BC not gotten hurt. So, unfortunate for BC. Probably helps roster construction. Definitely secured Jalen Naylor's spot on the roster. Going back to Jalen Naylor, obviously he went to Michigan State. I was able to watch both of his last 2 games against Michigan, so 2020 and 2021 against Michigan. And then also there were some highlights from Rutgers where he had like 200 yards receiving. It was kind of a ridiculous, and 3 touchdowns. It was kind of a ridiculously awesome game from Naylor in that respect. But for Naylor, my first note, and this kind of popped up against Michigan right away, is that he is a little bit undersized as a wide receiver. He's not tiny, right? But I think he's around 6 foot, around that 180 mark. But the reason I noted it is because he was very easily rerouted by a physical corner on the first route. Like Michigan plays with very physical cornerbacks. At least they did under Don Brown in 2020, right? They moved to Mike McDonald last year, who's now the Ravens defensive coordinator. But they played a very physical press game, and he was able to be rerouted relatively easily. That's kind of a concern at the NFL level for me, just in terms of his route running. With that being said, I think in general he's a good route runner. He does a really good job threatening vertically. He sinks his hips into his cuts. He makes very nice cuts, and he's very skilled at stacking corners vertically. Like he's very good at releasing off of the line of scrimmage generally. At keeping hands off of him. He shows a swim move. He shows a number of other moves, like a rip move to get off of press coverage, and then he stacks corners very, very effectively. You see him on top of corners consistently on the tape. Able to catch deep balls there. That's exactly what you want from a deep receiver. With that being said, he had a relatively limited route tree at Michigan State. It's a lot of vertical routes and mostly 9 balls, not even a ton of posts. There were 1 or 2 digs, maybe a slant or 2 on the tape, but it's pretty limited, So you are going to have to run a more diverse route tree most likely at the NFL level in terms of stuff like live routes and that sort of thing. So it's not that he can't do those things; it's that I didn't get to see him do those things, so I can't necessarily confirm it. Like I said before, I think kind of the basis is there. Um, I talked about him being a vertical threat. I think he has the NFL speed to be a vertical threat, but he's not a true burner. Justin Jefferson has great NFL speed to be a vertical threat, but he's not a true burner. Stephon Diggs has great NFL speed to be a vertical threat, but he's not a true burner like a Tyreek Hill, right? So he doesn't pull away from defensive backs on tape. So, he's more of that 4-4 range guy, which is fine and can be a quality vertical receiver in the NFL, but it's not, that elite speed that some teams chase. So there's that, and again, this is a 6 round pick, right? So it's not like we're expecting the best player in the world. I thought he was a very competitive blocker. There are a couple really nice blocking reps on tape, so that's nice to see just that kind of competitive toughness. I put blocking, particularly for wide receivers, more in the competitive toughness category than I do in like, oh, this is a technical skill that I need them to have kind of category. I would say that his hands aren't great. He's kind of inconsistent tracking the ball in hands. There were a couple of drops on tape that I saw. They're not terrible.
He had a couple of drops in the preseason as well,
Yeah,
if I
and
recall.
he did have 1 or 2 drops in the preseason, so that kind of carried over. I don't think he had bad, like, terrible technique or something. Like, he wasn't basket catching things, and he did have decent hands technique, but I would say he's inconsistent and sometimes late with his hands. And then the final note is he flashed the vision to make plays after the catch to kind of win in open space. I think he has pretty good vision there. And he also understands when to just get upfield and, take what he can get. So, in general, I think he's somebody who can fill a role as a vertical threat. I think it makes sense why he made the roster. I know the Vikings liked him quite a bit. I think he has the potential to develop into something more. But like we saw in preseason, I don't think he's somebody we want seeing the field consistently right now. But I think we have 4 receivers who we do want to see the field consistency. I love what we saw from Amir Smith-Marset in the preseason. Just to go
Yeah,
back
he
to
looked
him a little
good.
bit.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's move on to the next position. Yeah, like we've said multiple times, the receiver group seems like one of the strongest positions on the team, if not the strongest position.
And I will say we may add a 6 wide receiver through after this first round of cuts. The receiver position does seem to be a deep one across the NFL, where there are a number of names that got cut today. I know Tyler Johnson's one for Gophers fans, but there were other names on top of that got cut today that kind of pique your interest as somebody who are like, ooh, maybe the Vikings want to try to go after that guy to add as their fifth guy.
We also had the Jalen Rager rumor. We
Oh
might
yeah,
need a
I
bunch of.
don't think that was a real rumor. That seemed
I
kind of
hope
like a
it's not
fake
true.
account to me, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the tight end group. If Irv Smith stays healthy, he's obviously our number one tight end, and this is a strong group if he plays because I believe he's still got a lot of talent. Behind him, a little shaky. Matt, talk to us about the tight end group a little bit. Just
Yeah,
how do you
so
feel about
so I personally have a lot of questions about the tight end group, even if Irv Smith plays, because while I agree he's talented, he hasn't really shown much at the NFL level. There were a couple of nice games in that 2020 season, and that's about it. I think he still only had about 300 receiving yards that year, right? So we're banking on a lot. Um,
I'm trying not to be negative,
and
so I'm just gonna say,
it
he
it does
yeah.
sound like he'll be ready for week 1 after his thumb surgery or whatever injury he had. I think it was the hand area. Behind him, Ben Ellison and Johnny Munt. I expected Johnny Munt to make this team all along. Like, we clearly targeted him specifically in free agency. He is a blocking tight end.
Sure.
Ben Ellison, also a blocking tight end.
Yep.
I don't have faith in either of those two as pass catchers. Now, for the other tight ends that were on our roster, Zach Davidson and Nick Muse, I don't have faith in them as pass catchers either, particularly after what they've shown in the preseason. I will say, I loved that Davidson was able to get the ball a couple times and show what he can do after the catch in preseason week 3, after the disastrous preseason week 2. I think the preseason week 2 kind of got away from him a little bit, where he had a drop and then he let that compound and he had 4 drops, right? Like,
Yeah, he's not.
it just, well,
I'm not gonna.
it just sucks for him because I think he's a very talented player. Also, he can't block to save his life, which is a little bit
Yeah,
disappointing. But
you gotta
um,
if you are a you know a devy like really interesting tools kind of player
mhm.
like that, you have to have like one consistent thing that the coaching staff can hang their hat on, and
Yep,
catching the ball is definitely one. Or
yep.
he's
I will
always a great
say
blocker, a willing blocker, whatever
I
it
will
is.
say I want him on the practice squad for 1 more year and see what we can develop him into for next season. That's what I want from him. Nick Muse,
Hit the dog machine, man.
Nick Muse, I thought had a good preseason week 2, and then he turned it around with a couple drops in preseason week 3, and I think that killed any ability for him to make the roster. Real quick on Muse, we aren't going to go as deep in scouting, but I want to get a little bit off in terms of what I scouted from him. I watched 2 Georgia games and a Clemson game, so Georgia 2 years in a row, and then Clemson. And I saw some really nice things from him as a blocker. We didn't see that as much in preseason, but I think he has the ability to block NFL caliber players. He did it with guys like Azeez Ojulari and Trayvon Walker, even at Georgia. Like, he showed the ability to block those guys and kind of locked a couple guys down. He technically had a wide punch. Think Oli Udoh. We've talked about that a lot going into blocking, so that could lead to holding calls. That was a bit of concern, but I thought he did a really good job on the move as a blocker, finding targets as well as a lead blocker and that sort of thing. As a pass catcher, he wasn't an explosive player at all. I didn't think he had a lot of wiggle as a route runner, which is a little bit disappointing, but I thought he showed a little bit of fluidity in route running, showed ability to get open and underneath spaces and zones, and showed nice hands. He made a nice catch through contact. He made a nice catch outside of his frame. So I thought he showed the potential to be kind of a combo tight end, like a Tyler. I think he showed the ability to develop into a Tyler Conklin level tight end, who you see as a quality blocker who can catch passes at a consistent level in the NFL, but doesn't have explosive athletic traits and is an explosive player at the tight end position. Maybe is kind of what I felt for Nick Muse.
So maybe he'll end up back on the practice squad, and we'll get another shot at seeing.
Yeah, I would expect him to be on the practice squad, and it's just such a concern to me that we haven't seen anything from Johnny Munt or Ben Ellison as receivers. I kind of hope we go outside somewhere and find somebody who can add some receiving talent while being a solid blocker to the Vikings.
Hey, Chris Herndon is available again. We can go out and get Chris.
Absolutely not.
Let's move on to. I'm so bummed about Chris Herndon. I thought he was going to be so good. All right, let's move on to. Let's talk a little bit about our offensive line. We have another scouting section to go through here, but let's just quickly talk about our starters. And obviously Darrisaw, O'Neal. Those are the unquestioned starters there. Oli Udoh survives again, against all odds, perhaps. Continuing to develop as an NFL player, I guess.
Yeah.
And then Blake Randall, who I honestly have not a single memory of. So let's talk a little bit about him. And also, please give us a rundown on Vidarian Lowe.
Yeah, so, obviously we got the 2 starters in there. Blake Brandell should be our swing tackle this year. He should be our 3rd tackle based on how the guys performed in the preseason. He was clearly the 3rd best. Well, I guess Darrisaw and O'Neal didn't really play in the preseason. He was clearly our best tackle in the preseason. And if you guys watched the 3rd preseason game, Timon Paris, man, oh my goodness, that was rough and unfortunate for him. But Oli Udoh, I thought had a disastrous preseason. I did not think he played well at all. I was a little bit.
He's made of Teflon.
I was a little bit surprised we kept him on the roster, honestly. Like, I think if we keep wide receivers, Oli Udoh's the cut. He's kind of the 53rd man on the roster to me right now. Vidarian Lowe, I didn't think quite did enough in the preseason to earn a roster spot, honestly, in my opinion. I thought he had a number of warts as well, and I'm going to get to the scouting report a little bit here. But I think it's kind of an example of the team. It's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes, I think, where they drafted this guy, they believe in him, so they're keeping him on the roster. And with Vidarian Lowe, I think he did show, that he has kind of backup quality traits as a tackle of somebody who can develop into a quality NFL backup.
So on a scale of 1 to Willie Beavers, like, where are we talking here?
Oh,
is he a Willie Beavers?
It's like I think he can be a Rashad Hill.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So
yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. So he's not Rashad Hill yet. He's not Willie Beavers. Willie Beavers was rough. I think
Yeah,
that
it was rough.
Lowe is a solid technician first, and Willie Beavers was very much not that. I really kind of liked his pass set. I don't think he's an explosive athlete, so it wasn't a really impressive pass set like you'll see from the better athletes in the NFL or Christian Darrisaw. But I thought he got nice depth and was able to get into it relatively quickly. I will say that athleticism does show up because if he oversets in his pass set, he gets too far outside. I did see a rusher win across his face, and that's a bit of a concern for an NFL level player. I did also see, and the only game I was able to get from him was the Wisconsin game. So it's not quite top tier college competition, but it's solid, college level competition. I did also see an edge rusher beat him around the edge, and we saw that a couple times in the preseason as well, where the edge rushers were able to beat him around the edge, get to the quarterback. So that explosion out of his stance, I don't think is going to ever be at an elite or starter level in the NFL, but it might be good enough to get you by in a game where you're giving him tight end chip help. I did think that he had, and this is something that you might be reminded of Willie Beavers with. I thought he had heavy hands. He could knock people back on first contact. When he was able to make contact and get his hands on people as a blocker, he did a really nice job mirroring, matching, and kind of locking those guys out. So I think that was
He
nice.
has a heavy punch.
Yes. I do think that his
Willie
hands
Beavers reference, everybody.
I
Just
do
so
think his hands got a little bit wide and outside as well. I thought that his pad level could have been more consistent. He shows the ability to get movement in the run game, so that was pretty nice. But again, he's not a high level athlete, so it's not a scenario where he's going to be like dominating on zone blocks like you'll see from like Garrett Bradbury, right? Or like a Brian O'Neill's a great high level athlete blocker. Um, and I thought he showed a nice finish, so that's kind of my thoughts on Vidarian Lowe.
but it didn't translate yet. So you're wanting to see more.
Yeah, so it didn't quite translate yet in the preseason, but I'm okay with him being on the roster as a developmental player.
Sure, absolutely. All right. Congratulations, Ollie Udo, the luckiest man in the NFL. All right, let's talk a little bit about the interior offensive line. Not a whole ton of surprises here. We've got Ezra Cleveland still on the team, obviously. Garrett Bradbury is here for now. We had a really interesting performance from our rookie Ed Ingram, who you guys have talked about a lot. We both know Nick absolutely loves. Chris Reed, Austin Schlottman, rounding things out. Schlottman kind of got his butt kicked from my memory in the
Uh,
preseason a little bit, but
so
how do
so
you
I
feel
would
about the
say
group?
I would say Schlottman actually played pretty well preseason week 2. Preseason week 3 was a little bit of a different story. The entire offensive line had problems preseason week 3, but I
That
thought
was rough.
Schlottman looked rosterable. And honestly, all 6 of the interior guys, if you count Jesse Davis, who we traded, I thought were going to be on the roster initially. Now, obviously, Jesse Davis got traded, but that's okay. I'm really excited that Ed Ingram won the starting guard job. Um, for a second round rookie, that's nice to see, especially because we brought in legit NFL competition for him, right? Jesse Davis had started a lot of games in the NFL. I don't know if he was a great player, but he started a lot of games. Chris Reed had started games in the NFL. Austin Schlottman has started a couple games in the NFL. So it's nice to see. The one thing I should note here is I was seeing some rumors that the Vikings had been shopping for interior offensive line depth. I don't know if that means a center. I don't know if that means another guard, that sort of thing. But obviously, we sent away some of our interior offensive line depth in Jesse Davis. So I don't think we're shopping too seriously. For Garrett Bradbury, he's going to remain the starter. If you don't like Garrett Bradbury, you're gonna have to live with that fact for the rest of this season, pretty much. It's
Live with it.
it's just kind of the situation he was in. He's a great run blocker, a terrible pass blocker. I think I'm hoping that the staff is going to be able to do things to mitigate that. I think that Ed Ingram being the starting guard helps that from day one because Ed Ingram, in my opinion, has the power and strength to be able to help out with that. But and Kevin O'Connell even mentioned this in one of his press conferences, he's going to need to be better when defenses key in on him and isolate him in pass protection. That's we need to ask for that, and I hope that he's able to improve a bit on that in this
Agreed.
season.
Agreed. Okay, that pretty much covers the offensive side of the ball. Let's move over quickly to the defensive side of the ball. And I think some of these positions were pretty well set in stone. A lot of these guys didn't even play in the preseason, but the interior defensive line, let's start there, was a position that, we knew there'd be turnover. We knew there was lots of names brought in. We were trying a lot of things here. We already talked about Armand Watts, surprise cut. So the group we end up with, Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips, those guys were shoo-ins. We've got the trade for Ross Blacklock, so we've got to see more from him. Jonathan Bullard, the other Lynch, James Lynch, and our rookie, who I know you have some notes you want to go over, Asezi Atomolo. So let's talk a little bit about this group, Matt. How do you feel about how this fell
Yeah,
into shape here?
I feel great about the starters in terms of Tomlinson and Phillips, right? Like Phillips played awesome in the preseason. I think Tomlinson's a quality starter. Obviously, we now have a bigger question in the third position. I like the way Jonathan Bullard played in the preseason. I think on base downs, when you're expecting the run, he's very interesting to me there, and I think he's a startable level player based on what I saw in limited snaps in the preseason. Ross Blacklock, you got to hope he's a rotational pass rusher from the inside, I think is what you hope for him. And then James Lynch, I think, is solid depth along that line based on how he's played. Like, you're not going to embarrass yourself with James Lynch in there if one of the other guys gets hurt. So I'm okay with all of those players. Odomewo in preseason, I thought he started off a little bit rough. There were a couple plays where he kind of ended up getting crushed in the first couple games. And then the third game, I thought he played pretty well. It was kind of a difficult question for him whether or not he was going to make the roster. Kind of like Lowe, I think he's more on the roster due to the fact of being a draft pick than necessarily earning it throughout the preseason process. But also the T.Y. McGill injury kind of plays into this, right? So if T.Y. McGill isn't put on injured reserve, we have a lot more questions about Odomewo making the roster over him, I think, personally. So Asezi Odomewo, he was actually our first pick out of all of the guys we're talking about tonight. He was our first pick in the fifth round. Chai Chandler was the second. So he is out of the University of Minnesota, obviously. And the game I was able to get from him was against Ohio State. And I thought it was pretty promising, particularly for a player of his stature as a run defender. So he played at about 270 pounds. I think we're asking him to bulk up a little bit, and I think that might be part of the process for him and why he looks a bit undersized at the NFL level, kind of looked a bit undersized and underwhelming in preseason, is we're asking him to play more of that 5-tech 4-eye role when he was an edge rusher in college, and we're kind of asking him to bulk up a little bit and play with a bit more strength. I will say in college, he was strong for a college defensive lineman. Against Ohio State, they have NFL caliber talent across that entire offensive line. And he showed up well. He stood guys up in run defense. He played double teams actually really well with really nice technique, kind of getting one shoulder turned and getting his hip through the other player to prevent them from climbing to the second level while preventing people from pushing him back. So I thought that was really encouraging. He sets a very nice edge as a run defender. Where I downgrade him is his pass rush. He wasn't a consistently explosive player. There were one or two times where he exploded off of the snap pretty well, and he showed an inside counter on the one where he got off really well and then worked inside, ripped through the defender, and got a pressure on the quarterback. But those reps were few and far between. So he kind of lacks the explosion and the get off on the line, which is more okay, I guess I should say. It's not great to have as a 5 technique or a 4-eye, but it's more okay to have that than as an edge rusher if you're not able to get off the line. Like, he didn't beat a tackle around the edge in that game a single time, right? So you want to see that from a guy who's an edge rusher. Maybe from the interior, that's a bit less of a concern, but I still didn't quite see the explosion there from him. Obviously, there's a reason he's a 5th round player, but I'm hoping that he can develop into a solid run defender at the NFL level. Is I guess my main hope with him.
All right. So yeah, good group of players there. Some question marks, but also usable
Yeah,
players.
I think the starter level is very quality, and I think we have having four guys who I feel good about rotating in on the NFL defensive line, and then having kind of a question mark in Blacklock is pretty good depth for the interior of the defensive line.
Agreed. Agreed. All right, let's talk a bit about the edge rushers. Another similar situation. The two starters were no brainers. We got Danielle Hunter, Zadarius Smith. You also have DJ Wanham surviving again. Some interesting plays from him in the preseason. He looks like he's coming along.
Yeah, I thought he
The
played a lot
only
better in the preseason.
2021 Yeah, absolutely. The only 2021 third rounder remaining on the roster, Patrick Jones. He made it through. And the player with perhaps the best name on the Minnesota Vikings of 2022, Luigi Villain, also makes the cut as an edge rusher. So, Matt, tell us a little bit about this group. How do you feel about how we're sitting here?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, starter level, fantastic if they stay healthy in Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith. I don't think there's much of a question
They
about
should
that.
both get tattoos this season that say if they stay healthy.
Yeah.
Both of them should just get that
Yeah.
tattoo on their arm, and then every day, every morning, just psych
Just
themselves up.
just visualize it, right?
Utilize it, yeah.
Speak it into existence. Stay healthy. Speak staying healthy into existence.
Yeah.
But no, it's kind of a situation where I'm concerned about the depth still. I am now. I've trashed DJ Wanham a lot, right? I'm more hopeful right now than I think I've been in a long time on DJ Wanham. Based on what we saw from the preseason, there were a couple of really, really impressive reps from him. So I'm hoping that can translate as we get to the regular season. Patrick Jones, I thought, again, maybe more of a solid run defender than necessarily somebody who I'm expecting a lot from pass rush. I think if one of Hunter or Smith gets hurt, or both of Hunter or Smith gets hurt, again, we're in really big trouble at the edge rush. Luigi Villain, I thought, obviously he had the really cool interception, and I think there was another nice play that he had in that final preseason game. A really great story as an undrafted player making the roster. Really fantastic name. I don't think he's a player that I want taking significant snaps at edge rusher in the NFL level right now.
His name is Luigi Villain.
Yes, maybe he's, as a developmental player, I think maybe we have something there. In a couple of years, come back and talk to me, but I am a little bit concerned. I would like to try to add more quality depth at this spot, even if it comes at Villain's expense, honestly.
Matt, we were talking earlier about the absurdity of projecting a pick from 2025. And do you think we will still be doing this show in 2025?
I sure hope so. I love doing this show, man.
You said ask me in a couple of years, and I had that thought. I was like, huh. Are we just like crazy trying to project into the future?
All right, we're bringing the existential crises back to the podcast.
Listen, we got to mix it up a little bit here. All right, let's keep it moving. We're almost through the defense. Well, that's not true. We got a few more positions to go here. Let's talk about the linebacker group a little bit. Again, well, this is where we've seen probably the most change, I think, in terms of positions. There's only one remaining veteran that we've seen a lot from. We have Troy Dye as some consistency there. Eric Kendricks obviously is the veteran I'm talking about. We've got Jordan Hicks, and I think my personal guy who kind of flagged for me this preseason, Brian Asamoah. He's easily made the roster as well. So talk to me a little bit about this group. Am I crazy, or does Brian Asamoah look kind of dope?
So I think you're grading the flashes a little bit on Brian Asamoah and not looking at the whole picture. And I think that's maybe a bit of an issue when people look at linebackers in general, because there are some really nice, impressive snaps from Brian Asamoah, but the consistency is not there yet to me. Nick and I kind of talked
You're
about.
throwing a wet blanket on my
Yeah,
guy
I
here, is what
know.
you're saying.
Nick and I kind of talked about this last week, but I think he bites way too hard on play action, which isn't something that necessarily shows up, particularly like, when you're just watching games in the preseason, but it can really come back to bite you in the passing game, right? Like, Eric Kendricks is so good at reading play action, staying patient, and, not allowing play action passes to hurt him. Brian Asamoah is kind of the opposite, where he will take, with any sort of run action, 2 steps forward immediately. And that leads to some really impressive plays in the whole making tackles behind the line of scrimmage and at the line of scrimmage.
I like my linebackers with a little bit of aggression.
And
So
that's
I think that's a me thing. That's kind of like,
and that's what you've seen, but
yeah,
that hurts your integrity on the back end in the passing game. And how many times have we seen in this preseason? Now, a lot of times it was defensive ends or the edge rushers dropping back into the coverage, but the short passes over the middle, the dink and dunk passing getting down the field on us has been an issue for sure in this preseason. So it's a
sure.
concern with me if we have to have Brian Asamoah or Troy Dye, who I just don't think is a quality NFL player. We've seen a lot of him playing at linebacker. I don't want him starting on the team. If Kendricks or Hicks has to mix significant time, I think we're in trouble with our linebacker depth, personally. Now, Asamoah,
Yeah, I was trying to go positive, man.
as a prospect, I think he's a really exciting prospect. He's really fast. That speed allows him to make up for his lack of size, and I think he honestly is going to be able to fit the run at the NFL level. And he clearly has the athleticism to play the pass. It's just the mental side of playing the pass is not there yet with his game. So it's something we hope
Well,
we can develop
hopefully,
moving forward.
yeah, hopefully he can develop. You're absolutely right, though. It's a position where depth is another, kind of concern for us. Um, as much as I enjoyed his preseason, obviously I will
He is a
defer
super
to you
fun
there.
player. He's so
Yeah,
fun.
I liked him a lot in college too. So I'm kind of I'm a sucker. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the cornerbacks. Patrick Peterson back on the squad. Not a surprise there. We have Cam Dantzler surviving again. People have been pretty down on him, but I thought he had a pretty good preseason as well.
Yeah,
So
all the reports out of camp have been pretty up on Cam Dantzler,
yeah,
honestly.
yep. Andrew Booth easily made the team, and we have Chandon Sullivan, Caleb Evans, and Chris Boyd rounding out the group. Not a lot of exciting guys here. I mean, Andrew Booth, we're excited about his future. How do you feel about this group? Okay, here's the thing. When I was watching the games and reading, the news and everything, I wasn't really thinking about the cornerbacks a lot, and I just figured that was a good thing.
Yeah,
Now
so
I'm reading off the names, and I'm kind of like, that's not the most inspiring group. What do you think,
So
Matt?
I think if you look at the starters, it's the weakest link easily on the defense. If you just look at the names in terms of starting, but I don't do. I like the depth more than I do at other positions. Actually, like I've been really high on Andrew Booth. He had an injury that he sustained in the second preseason game. It's a relatively minor injury, but that is a little bit of a concern for a young player trying to get acclimated. Cam Dantzler sounds like he's been great throughout the preseason. I mean, obviously he has a difficult task covering the receivers that the Vikings have, but it does sound like he's played like a starter. Patrick Peterson, I was pretty impressed with last year. I think he's still a quality NFL starter. Chandon Sullivan in the slot is the big question to me. I don't think Chandon Sullivan's all that great. Obviously, we didn't pay him a ton. And the other problem is we don't have a backup slot corner right now. All of Andrew Booth, Caleb Evans, and Chris Boyd are outside corners. They're not slot corners. They didn't play slot corner during the preseason. So we cut the guys who we had playing slot corner in terms of Perry Nickerson and Nate Hairston. They didn't deserve to make the roster either. But it's a really big concern that I don't think our slot corner is a good starter and that we don't have a backup behind him. So that's a pretty big question to me.
That
Also,
sounds That does sound concerning, Matt.
Also, also Chris Boyd deserved to make the team. I thought he played pretty well in the third preseason game. He's a really good special teams player. That's also what you need from your sixth corner. So I
Sure.
think he deserved his spot on the roster.
Well, I'll say this. Not the most inspiring breakdown there.
I
But if Cam Dantzler has really taken the next step as a player, I think it's going to be salvageable.
Yeah,
I'll say
and look at it this way. I think if you look at our starting 11 on defense, you get the two weakest links are now our third defensive lineman or Chandon Sullivan, and those are kind of mutually exclusive players, where that third defensive lineman is coming off the field in nickel, and Chandon Sullivan's not on the field in base towns, right? So it's kind of at least if you look at it that way, I think we have got quality starters across the board elsewhere. But do we want to flip to safety?
sure. Yeah, let's flip over to safety. Um, let's talk a little bit about the safety group. It's a really strong group here. We've got Harrison Smith, obviously. We've got Cameron Bynum, of course. I don't know. Seemed pretty good this preseason.
Again, camp reports from Cannon Bynum have been great, just like Dantzler.
Really
So
great.
we're really hoping that those guys can, they're starting over the rookies that we drafted highly. So that's
Yep.
hopefully
Really.
a good sign for them and not a bad sign for the rookies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I loved what I saw from Lewis Seen, and I think he's going to make some noise this year. I think we are going to. I feel like we might end up with that sort of elite pairing of safeties that we talked about a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago when I was on, and that is exciting. Josh Metellus made some plays in preseason, so he made the squad. What's your general impression of this group? How do you feel? I feel like I feel the opposite about this group than I do the cornerbacks.
Yeah,
I really like.
this is a really exciting group, and I think that our safety depth, having three, in my opinion, starting caliber players now. We haven't seen much of Lewis Seen, but I thought he was ready to start right away based off of his tape at Georgia, and I think he's played pretty well in this preseason, as you alluded to. Having those players who all of them I want on the field, like I actively want all three of these players on the field, can potentially ease the burden of that slot corner question a little bit. Cameron Bynum obviously has a slot corner past. We can see him. I could see him doing that. Harrison Smith at this point, I don't want put in man coverage, one-on-one coverage. Like he's fantastic and everything else, but that's kind of where I don't want him. Lewis Seen, I didn't love as a man coverage player at Georgia. Like I think he's great at pretty much everything else at safety, but I don't want to ask him. But if you have Lewis Seen and Harrison Smith, who have a ton of versatility otherwise, you can put them basically at any position, in the box, even at the line of scrimmage and deep, as players. You can put them on the field at the same time as Cameron Bynum. If you put Cameron Bynum in the slot, have them play quarters with Cameron Bynum in the slot, have them play a cover three defense with one deep and one up in the box. It doesn't matter who, they're kind of interchangeable, and you can put Cameron Bynum in the slot still. So like I think we have options there that kind of expand our options at corner, which makes me more excited about the secondary as a whole. I think if you put the secondary together as a whole, it's better than the cornerback room kind of looks like initially. So I'm excited about it. Josh Metellus, again, more of kind of a special teams option, I guess, for this team. That's kind of what you want your fourth safety to be. I don't think he'd be a good starter if he sees the field, but I think he deserves to be on an NFL roster, and that roster might as well be the Vikings.
Why not, baby? Yeah, really good group there, and I think there's no question that this defense certainly has the right horses to be better than last year.
Yep.
All
I agree. And, I think injuries played a big part in the role of why the defense struggled so much last year, honestly.
Yeah, we're totally in agreement on that. Okay, let's just briefly go through the special teams group. Greg Joseph was killing it all through camp. No surprise there.
That 58-yard field goal in Denver, ridiculous. I mean, that was awesome.
Yeah, he's great. It's good to have some consistency finally at that position. I'm really excited about our chubby punter,
Yeah,
Ryan
man.
Wright. I know he's not chubby. I know he's an
He's
NFL player.
linebacker
He's
size, but yeah,
he's a
man.
big
That
guy.
was awesome. Like
He was awesome, man. He was my favorite part of preseason game 3.
we were so upset that the punt off didn't happen this week because the punt off was very exciting. But we got something more excited in Ryan Wright's punts. Like he made the punt off not matter, and that's really important.
I cannot believe it, but I might be looking forward to punts this year. I'm being dead serious right now, by the way. Really enjoyed watching him play. I'm glad he made the team. We haven't had an entertaining punter in a long time. You know, I like an entertaining punter. All right. And then, of course, I'm assuming this is a long snapper.
Yes,
DePaul.
Adam DePaula is our long snapper. Good job,
I
Greg.
didn't know who he was. I was like, wait, I don't recognize that name. All right, Adam DePaul is our long snapper this year. Congratulations, Adam.
Wait, is
What
it
do you
Andrew?
think?
Did I write that down wrong? Oh no. Now
I don't
you
know.
got me questioning myself.
I don't
I'm
fucking
so
know,
sorry.
man. What do you? What is your impression of his long snapping, Matt? How do you feel about his long
I
snaps?
don't
Is he snapping that
watch.
thing? Is it high and tight?
It is Andrew
Oh, man.
DePaula. Oh my goodness, I got this wrong. Uh,
Sorry, we owe an apology, Andrew DePaula. All kidding aside, your dream came alive today, and that is really, really cool.
I mean, he was our long snapper last year. I think he's fine.
Well, hey, his dream stayed alive. That's something worth congratulating as well. Awesome. I can't believe we did it, Matt. I can't believe we did it in just about an hour. That's incredible. We went through the whole roster, folks. Do you have any final thoughts about the 53 Minnesota Vikings of 2022, day one?
Yeah, I'm excited. Like the roster kind of has been juiced up a little bit. I think, like I mentioned,
Cool.
if you look at the starters, this is a really really quality team. On offense across the board, I think it's really good. Obviously, the questions are kind of the interior offensive line, right? With Bradbury and Ingram is the rookie. But if those guys can play up to the level that we hope they play, particularly Ingram, who has been really impressive so far with what he was able to do in the preseason, if he plays up to the level that he kind of showed he could play to in the preseason, this offense is going to be a very good offense based on having Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, and KJ Osborne as weapons with Irv Smith mixed in there, with his explosive potential. I'm really excited about that. And then if you look at the defense, and it's a really quality starting 11 across the board, right?
Yeah.
Like we got Patrick Peterson, who is not elite Patrick Peterson, but he's a good savvy NFL player who I think fits very well in this defense. We have a star in Harrison Smith. We have a star in Eric Hendricks. We have a star in Daniel Hunter. We have really solid quality starters in Dalvin Tomlinson and Harrison Phillips up the middle. Jordan Hicks, I think, is a solid starter. Like we've got a lot of talent on this team at the top level. I think you kind of get concerned with injuries based on the depth that we have. I don't think it's quite as good and up to par as some of the better teams in the league. But if this team stays healthy, man, it can be competitive.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And the only thing I would add is just that I think the expectation should be winning it all. Still, I feel like this group is built to win. That is obvious. So go win.
I think making the playoffs should be the expectation for this team based on the talent that we have. I mean, obviously, asking a team to win the Super Bowl is kind of a rare event. I wouldn't put the Vikings in the upper tier of Super Bowl competitive teams, and the depth is my question there, and the quarterback a little bit, But at the end of the day, this should be a very good competitive football team who is in a lot of games. I'm ready for week 1 against the Packers.
Excellent. Amen, brother. All right. Let's wrap it up a little bit. Matt, where can people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, at Fries Football on Twitter.
At Fries Football. Our co-host who's not with us this evening at Nick Olson NFL. That's Nick Olson, of course.
Go make fun of him for losing his bet with Luke Braun on the 53-man roster, by the way, and check out his Avi. I'm sure it's going to be great.
Yeah, his handle's looking pretty rough. And you can find me on Twitter or Instagram at You've Been Greg with 3 G's. You can find us on Twitter at Kindred Skulls. You can also find us on YouTube by searching for Kindred Skulls. Our videos all go up there. And we're available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you don't, if you want us on somewhere, let us know if we're not on it. Matt, we did it. Have a great evening, man.
Yeah, have a great evening, everybody. Skull Vikings.
Skull Vikes.
Oh, baby. The first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score the old Vikings along. We'll score